The art and structures of ancient Egypt seem to just come out of nowhere, and because of this, some people assume it must have come from somewhere else. If you look at this sculpture, you can easily tell that it's repetitive of every other ancient Egyptian statue that you'll see later on. The hair is Nubian, as is stereotypically known today, but many ancient Egyptians have this hair. But of course, it's called a Nubian wig by archaeologists and historians. Why exactly do they have this Nubian wig going back right to the beginning of the ancient Egyptian histories? And why do the paintings of ancient Egypt look the same from the beginning till the end? There's not a lot of paintings we can rely on which can tell us about the transition from walled paintings in caves and walled paintings in tombs or stone structures that were artificially made. But what we do know is that we have this. This painting is one of the oldest in ancient Egypt. In fact, it's one of the oldest on an artificial platform. And you can clearly see that it's a transition between cave art and what would later become ancient Egyptian art. The speculation that I've always had is the reason why they paint on walls, and I think this is the same for a lot of people around the world, is because they're just mimicking what they used to do in caves, and that they have no idea why they're doing it. Now, you might think, well, there you go. That painting is not that good, and the later ones would be much better. But this is the Scorpion King, who is way before the dynastic times of Egypt. And the Scorpion King is looking exactly like any other pharaoh in ancient Egypt. He has the hat, which is typical of the pharaohs, even though it only represents one side of the kingdom, not both. He has a cross that he's holding. He obviously is surrounded by a fan that's right next to him and the flower. You would think that this person would look nothing like this, since that other painting is so crude and ill made, but it's not true. Almost everything else, like the first statue I showed you, is made with almost full excellence. Now, I will not confuse you and pretend that things didn't get better in other ways, but their art seems to be the same. One of the things that got better was obviously their pottery. In the beginning, it was made by the poor, and then later it was made by the rich. The rich copied the poor, and they became way better, made out of stones that are very expensive and hard to work with. Now, to be fair, you can see here obviously that the hair of this ancient person and the hair of this less ancient one, about 1,500 years later, here in which is a Nefertiti daughter, you can see here that they have the exact same hairstyle, which is Nubian. But to be fair, it's in Upper Egypt in what is called Heracleopolis or whatever, but it's actually called Nekhen in ancient Egyptian. Now, Nekhen has so many things that are valuable because, of course, it's Upper Egypt and it looks Nubian as hell. Remember that this is pre dynastic Egypt, and so I didn't want to reveal this earlier, but this crown is representing Upper Egypt, which is our south today, which would be Nubia. This pharaoh that is represented here is probably a Nubian. The Scorpion King based around all the other people that we've seen that are depicted were probably Nubians. Could you guess when this was made? Well, let's look it up. 3,500 BC. It looks like it was made maybe 100 years ago. It's so well put together. This is called blacktop earthenware or pottery. Now, of course, the technique of ancient Egyptian art did not change for thousands of years, but you'll notice that pottery like this in ancient Egypt was mainly imported from Sudan, not even Nubia, but Sudan, because this tradition sort of slowed down in Egypt. As we read there, blacktop redware jar, 3650 to 3300 BC, black-topped redware jar, pre-dynastic Naqada II from Egypt, southern Egypt, Hierakonpolis, which is Nekhen, Fort Cemetery, Tomb 37. It's a marvel. You look at it and immediately it jumps at you that this is one of the most African things that you've ever seen with your own eyes. Well, why? Well, if it's created in Sudan long time ago, surely it must have died by now. There is no way they could have kept a tradition. Think about all the things that have come out since this jar was invented 3,650 years ago. Remember, there was no spinning wheel when this was made. This was handmade. This thing was made by the hand by females long time ago, and it was no longer in use in various parts of Egypt, and it really wasn't that good of an export material outside of Africa. So what is it doing being made today by Sudanese women? Now, of course, for Nubian women today who build these, you could say that they just had an affinity for ancient Egypt and that's why they do it. So let's first, before we look at these women, look at something that is even closer to that date. Kerma. Kerma is in Sudan. It's close to Egypt, but it's not in Egypt. As we read classic Kerma Beka, the bell-shaped Kerma Beka is a hallmark of classical Kerma civilization found stacked together in the tombs in groups of as many as 7. The Kerma Beka is the most common form of classical Kermaware, the outgrowth of a long Nilotic tradition of black-topped, red-polished ware. These delicate thin-walled vessels mark a zenith in ceramic technology. Their production required a highly controlled kiln temperature and atmosphere formed by hand. Each pot was covered with red ochre and polished before firing. To achieve the black top and interior, the vessel were inverted in a combustible material to create a reducing atmosphere during firing. The irregular opalescent band between the black and red surface seems to be glaze-like material that was painted on before firing. These graceful, finely modeled cups, with their highly polished surface and opalescent ring, are among the greatest works of ceramic art. This beaker was found in the grave of the ancient Egyptian site of Abydos. Classic Kerma ware has been found in a number of tombs in Egypt dating from the late Middle Kingdom to the early New Kingdom, 1785 to 1500 BC. These tombs generally contain both Kerma ceramics and Egyptian goods, although it is not certain that the owners of these tombs were Nubians. It is quite possible that they represent traders originally from Kerma who had taken up residence in Egypt. A good theory, that is. Except we just saw that the oldest of these Sudan ware, these Nubian ware, earthenware, are from 3000 BC in Egypt. That means they could have taken residence, sure. But in 3000 BC, pre dynastic Egypt, that would basically mean that the ancient Egyptians are part of the larger Kerma structure, the larger Nubian structure, that they're just one of the same. This picture is from the Lost Kingdoms of Africa, which is about Nubia. I recommend everybody watch that. This is before the firing of it, where they put the red ochre on top of it. There's a lot of things in Africa that are built like this, but they don't get the black top. They have the red, but not the black top by the end because it's not inverted. And you can see there that it's built mainly by women. In fact, it's almost exclusively a female thing in the whole of Africa, which is one of those things that draws Africa today together, that pottery is made by females, something that you don't see anywhere else. If you go to Samaria, it's exclusively a male thing. If you go to Europe, male. If you go to really anywhere, it's male. And some people have speculated that in Africa, the reason why it's male is because cooking was something that was more a female thing than a male thing. And though some females were happy with what they had before, some females were inventive and created a lot of inventions that had to do with fire and cooking and stuff like that, that today we have pushed away as just, just human invention. It's even possible that females invented fire. While the specimen on that documentary is a fine one, it's only one. And you can't really build a whole structure based on one piece of evidence. So let's see if we can find more. How about these black topped pottery from Darfur? You're going to hear that word a lot from me from now on, because I kind of do that where I pick a specific city that I know about in ancient times and then I talk about it again. Darfur has this pottery that is earthened, and they do their reversing and make black topped ware, or black mixed ware with the red in it. And as you can see, all of this pottery was made by females. And now, mass production for the village. I mean, you can clearly see in the background that that is a village. It's not a city. It's not a big thing. This is just a bunch of people. How it's made is actually more. Let's reverse 1 second. One of the reasons why Nigeria must have had cattle, even though they don't depict their people as having cattle from 10,000 BC, one of the reasons is because of how pottery is made in Africa. One of the key ingredients is cow dung. So this pottery here, there's a formation where you mix it with cow dung in order to get the way that it looks. And obviously pottery found in Nigeria is way older than pottery found in Nubia. And that's how we know that it moved from Nigeria to Nubia. And so this would mean, and later versions of pottery in Nigeria is made with cow dung. So why wouldn't it be the exact same thing? Made by cow dung, made by females. Remember that. Remember those two. Made with cow dung, made by females, and it also has the similar stuff, but it doesn't have this black stuff. That seems to be a fully East African invention. East African meaning on the east of Africa, because I know some people go, East Africa is only Kenya. I get it. That's that's a political designation. I'm talking about direction. Just like when I say South Africa, I don't necessarily mean the country.
My name is Wilera Haruna.
Okay.
What's
And
next?
what do you do?
I sell local pots, which is clay pots.
Interesting.
It is an inheritance. I inherited this from my great great grandmothers.
Wow.
But normally, it's the female that normally do the molding. The male are not involved.
Interesting.
Yes.
So has it always been that way?
Yes, since I was born, that was how it is, and up to now.
Wow, the women are the ones who do this.
Everything is the women that are doing, and they are using bare hand, not machine or anything. They use their bare hand in molding, and even in the process of digging the clay, everything they use axe
Wow.
for digging.
So that means it must be very tedious, like very hard.
Yeah, it's very hard, and it's the women that are doing again.
Wow.
It's not the opinion of scholars or lecturers that this must have been a female profession. It's the people who live in these communities. It's the people who live in my community, the people who live in other communities close to Egypt and outside. And remember, you even had, what's his name, Herodotus, say that the females are the ones that do the molding. You go to North Africa, I've shown you British Path documentaries that show you that the even the Libyans, the Berbers, the original Berbers, even the ones who are white of skin, they say that traditionally it's the females that do it. Very strange for any other continent, because in those other continents it's all men. Women aren't even thought to go outside. You heard what she said. You have to go dig it. This isn't, oh, men come and fetch it. These women, and it's funny because in South Africa it's exactly the same. These women are responsible for building this clay and blah blah blah, but they're really responsible for cooking, and this is considered part of the cooking process. They have to go fetch firewood. Think about that if you're European or anywhere else. The people in Africa responsible for fetching, chopping, cutting, and then cooking with firewood are females. If this king of the jungle type lifestyle made by these African men or possibly by these African women, which uses the female mainly as the tools of the workforce, where the men are usually just the dictators of their family and community, and in mass, the females end up having the bigger say so, but that's only if they agree with each other. It is possible, and this is just a hypothesis, that this was founded because females had invented fire. And the reason why anyone would say that is because it is so consistent in Africa. Whether you're talking about the Khoisan, whether you're talking about the Nigerians, whether you're talking about anybody else really, that without exception in Africa, it is the females that do the body of the work in the traditional way. With Christianity moving into Africa and changing that completely, you see a huge transition where the men refuse to work. If you read the early stories, the men would refuse to work. They even had to make a law in the mines saying that females weren't allowed to go. Some men in the Zulu kingdom would send like 8 or 9 of their wives to go work in the mines, and they had to literally ban them. The first king of Congo, who transitioned to Christianity, literally was about to change his mind that second when they didn't want to baptize his wife because they said that women couldn't get baptized for some reason, which I don't know if that was consistent with Portuguese law, but it was definitely what they didn't want to do there. And until they allowed her to get baptized, he then continued with their missions. Remember, females were also engaged in war times with men. They did not stay back like other countries. They would go in there and they would fight wars alongside men. It was not obvious to Africans that because women are smaller, that they do not deserve to do labor. And this is very important because the reason I'm showing its ubiquity within the African continent is to show you that it must have started around thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. And it's unknown. You can't say when it started or how it started, but it must have started a long time ago. The fact that it's just common throughout the whole continent, it's default, but it's not default outside of the continent. Now let's transition back. If we go to ancient Egypt, the part that makes me laugh when we think about this is the fact that they used to say women in Egypt stayed at home and just looked outside their window and watched the men work because women weren't allowed to work, and that's why they're painted yellow. A hilarious thought when you think that Africa women were the majority of the workforce. The majority of depictions of females in ancient Egypt are maids, royal women, concubines, and all kinds of privileged people who lived close to the kings and pharaohs and all of that, chiefs. But this is not the true situation of the random female in ancient Egypt. Because of this, they stereotyped and thought that women were these laying about, just happy to be sleeping females where men go to work on the pyramid, blah, blah, blah. It is 100% true that men worked hard in Egypt. This is because some of the jobs were just impossible for females, like moving, 2-ton bricks. You're going to need a lot of females to do that. The reason why the ancient Egyptians transitioned to men majority of the time when it came to the pyramids is because it's just impossible for females to do it. But then people took that and ran with it. In their head, that means that women didn't work in Egypt. But every time you see a local situation where you see farming, the funny part is even when the Arabs came, Arab females were farming. But when you look at farming, when you look at toiling, and you look at building houses, when you look at building huts, when you look at stuff like that, it's still the females who are responsible, and that's in writing. Now, you might be thinking I was saying that men did nothing. I did not say that. Even outside of ancient Egypt, men did stuff. Men were responsible for many things, moving messages and stuff like that. But again, they would have an accumulation of wives, and those wives would be responsible for certain works. In fact, when Vasco da Gama first landed in Capo de Genta, the place of good people, he said that for every one man, it seemed like there was like 30 women. This was obviously because there was an abundance of females, both coming from other villages in order to fill their, let's call them harems. And there were also people who, you're going to see more women around if you land up anywhere important. Obviously, when it comes down lower and lower, each person starts to get closer to one female, and they have to do the work themselves instead of having their wives do it. It's almost like the lions. That's kind of how lions work. The male lions, though stronger and bigger, they sort of do other things, what even looking after the kids, while the lionesses go and hunt. Now, in Africa, men hunted. I don't want to confuse you about that. Men were doing the hunting 99% of the time. But again, hunting is not a team sport necessarily. It's maybe 13, 14 people go hunt, and then the rest of the village is staying at home. Because, of course, one buck can feed a lot of people, and there's no fridges. Remember that there's no fridges. You don't store the meat. It's either going to go into the trash can or you're going to share it among the community, building trust within the community and building this we work together mentality. One that had decayed in ancient Egypt, because in ancient Egypt, money ruled everything. If you watched my previous video, you will have noticed that I use females as the default as representing the kingdoms. This is not for beauty's sake or anything like that. It's literally because of this that I'm talking about. It's because they would have been the majority. If you went to talk to a female worker in ancient times in 10,000 BC, the first people you would have seen are the females, and you would ask them, how are you building this? Why are you building this house like this? Why are you doing this? Why are you milking this? Why are you doing that? Why are you collecting this? Even the marketplaces, according to people in Angola and stuff like that, were filled with females. And Herodotus said the same things. The men, they do the work elsewhere while the women go to the markets and shop and sell. So when I revise and come back and do a video about 10,000 BC going backwards, even 100,000 BC, keep this in mind. Keep this thought in mind.